Hello, I'm David Hunt, and welcome to The Art Hunter. An architect. His influence is with us all the time. We live in a building that an architect would have, at some degree, built, especially if you live in an older building. Dating back to the ancient Greeks, think about the Egyptians, the Romans, and then we move forward a little bit to some of my favourite people, Frank Lloyd Wright and Gaudi, and we travel the world to look at these buildings and ooh and ah over them and look at the beauty and the art of so many wonderful architectural buildings. My guest today is an architect, and he's won many awards, and he's got an OA, which is that an Order of Architecture or Order of Australia? Oh no, I think it might be Australia, because he's won every other architectural award. He was the founding partner of his company, and some of his buildings are landmarks here in Melbourne and in other countries in the world as well. One of them, the second tallest building in the world as we speak. Let's talk to him and see if any of his buildings are still standing. Karl, hello and welcome.
David, hello.
So where did it all start for you? And well, first off, congratulations on some of the extraordinary work that you have done, and given somebody like me who loves architecture to look at some of your buildings and go, oh gosh, I love them, especially the one with the bees behind me, which is my favourite building. So where did it all start from? Were you a little kid that would build things with, like your little toy bricks?
Oh, it's funny you should ask that, because when my father passed away some few years ago, I was going through all of his things, and I found a whole pile of my drawings as a kid that he'd collected.
And you didn't know he still had them?
No, I didn't.
Oh.
I looked through them, and what were they? They were houses, they were buildings, they were ships, they were things that, well, maybe a lot of kids draw, but certainly there must have been...
Not houses and buildings and ships and stuff, no.
Well, a ship was interesting because my first memory in life was in a ship when my parents were coming out from Indonesia to settle in Australia after the war. And I was lost on the ship, and I still remember standing above this staircase in the bowels of the ship, not very unhappy, but I still remember it. What happened is I got lost on the ship. They thought I'd gone overboard.
Oh, whoa.
But the miracle is, and this is the miracle of life, they found me at the door of our cabin, about 3 decks below. So that's interesting. So maybe that's why ships started coming out of me.
Right, yeah. Wow, that must have been a scary moment for them in time.
It was for them, yeah.
So growing up in Australia, like from the migrant parents, how was that?
Growing up in Australia was fun, It was
brilliant.
It was that time when there were a lot of different nationalities coming to Australia. Greeks, Chinese, Italians, the culture was changing. I was making friends with a whole lot of different kids from different backgrounds, and didn't realise I was one of them. But they were great days, and there were freedoms as a child, when I was a child, that you just don't have now. My parents finally settled in Burwood and bought a block of land and made a little house, and that was considered to be a long way out of the city. And in fact, it was in orchards.
Oh, okay.
And our street was unmade. There was no gutter, no sewage, no water.
Fun to play then.
It was.
Yeah.
The end of the street was a barbed wire fence to a forest. In the forest was a cut tree, and which I still remember. So it was all about going out, being an adventurous child, and not having to be home till 5 o'clock.
Yep.
And they can't do that so easily these days, unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh, how wonderful. So when did it click with you that and going to learn being a draftsperson that an architect is, that would have been a big step back in that era.
It was, but you take these things as they come when you're young, and I was getting close to the end of school. I was probably 16 or something, and started thinking about what I wanted to do. My mother suggested engineering. If you can engineer, good safe job. So we went to RMIT and I got the handbook from the department, and I realised very quickly that I was not an engineer, but I did love all the subjects that I was reading in the handbook that was basically the architecture course.
Yep.
And
were you good at all of that? Because I remember back in like the old days, because I'm your vintage as well. Is that like we did a lot of protractors and all that at school. Like were you good at all that? I was hopeless.
I loved drawing. I loved mechanical drawing. I did. I loved coloured pencils. I love all the instruments, and I still do to this day. And in fact, in the office, I'm perhaps a rare commodity because everyone's so unbelievably efficient and clever on computers.
Yeah, and you're not?
No, I'm the one that's still drawing on yellow trace. Yeah.
That's funny. So you chose architecture. Was it architecture you chose to go to uni?
Yeah.
It's a pretty hard course, isn't it? Like, and what you've got to learn as an architect is not just the design; it's all the inside workings of a building, isn't it?
It is. I think one of the most important things is to have understandings of everything that goes into a building, and not necessarily be an expert in all of those technical aspects. Making a building is a process that requires a team of people, a team of consultants, engineers, engineers of all sorts, structural, mechanical, electrical, waste engineers. It just goes on and on and on. And the beautiful thing about making buildings is it's a great collaborative process, and in a good process, you're all learning off each other.
Yeah, and you went overseas and you studied overseas. Well, not studied. You worked overseas a bit.
I did. I was really lucky, David. I didn't actually get into architecture.
Oh. Okay.
Because for architecture, you had to be a whiz at maths, physics, chemistry.
Yep.
They were not my subjects.
Okay.
So I actually started in a drafting course.
Right.
And because it had a lot of the subjects from architecture, and then I transferred, or I kind of eased into architecture quite gently, and it was a great process. But drafting was 2 years full-time and 2 years part-time. So after 2 years, I needed to get a job. And that's where I was lucky, because I got that job in the office of Robin Boyd. And Robin Boyd is still thought of so highly for his contribution to Australian architecture and writing and the arts. And there I was, as this young kid, the master's apprentice in a way. But he passed away, unfortunately, after I'd been there for 4 years, which pushed me into my own little practice. And from that little practice, basically I then went overseas after about 4 years. And I, like many Australian young people, went to London. And that's where I started working overseas.
Yeah. And what was the difference? Because, like, we were such a young country, and architecturally, especially here in Melbourne, we had some amazing architecture because of the gold rush days, and we were one of the richest cities in the world at one stage. But then you go to a city like London, the history of the architecture there, it's mind-blowing, isn't it?
Oh, it is. But, I mean, wherever you go in the world, there's mind-blowing architecture, mind-blowing countryside, mind-blowing landscapes. There's so much to ingest. But London, for me, was to try and get a job with one of 4 particular architects that were doing work that I really aspired to learning more about. And fortunately, but after a while, I did get a job in one of those practices, and again, that was very, they were formative times for me.
Yeah, and what was it that you were looking for? What, what sort of architect company did you want to work with?
Well, the particular company that I started working with was called Farrell Grimshaw. Nick Grimshaw and Terry Farrell, they had a practice together in those days, and Nick Grimshaw in particular was looking at growth and change buildings. So buildings that were not necessarily buried in permanence. They were based on the fact that things change, situations change, people that have buildings change, and with that, a building that is flexible enough to change to evolving uses and evolving demands was something that they were doing, and doing very beautifully, and it was something that I was interested in. It wasn't happening really in Australia in those days.
Yeah. The design of a building to me is very, very important as a novice who loves architecture, and to me it's a true art form. An architect, like designing a beautiful structure back 100,000 years ago to now, I'm still in awe of architecture. What is it that draws us to it as a viewer?
Well, that's very much in the nature of the viewer. It's a very personal thing.
Like any art, in the eye of the beholder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But look, I think the thing about buildings, if they can communicate in one way or the other, even if they are startling and frightening, at least they're stimulating you to think and assess and interrogate. So buildings, of course, are what our cities are made of. And our cities are amazing, amazing structures on this planet. And so anything to do with that level of creativity and structural ingenuity put together is captivating, I think.
Yeah.
The other thing that is really important is that the buildings, taller buildings particularly, shape our city profiles. And that's one way to look at buildings. But where you really experience them is at ground level, how they connect into the city, or within the building looking out. So at ground level, how important is it that somehow it makes a contribution to its, to its context and its location?
Yeah.
And if it does, it's bound to, draw inspiration, enjoyment, certainly awareness from the people that come in touch with it.
And with buildings these days going up and up and up, it's fascinating to build that structure where all of a sudden something interesting happens at the top or halfway up or whatever, instead of it just being a plain building. And you've been very good at that, and your company has been very good at that. The Eureka over my shoulder, which we'll talk about the bees later because I had to get that shot in with the bees. But the top of the Eureka Tower is quite unique, and somebody's told me this, and I don't know if it's true or not. Ted, a mutual friend, is, you describe to me what's going on at the top of the Eureka building.
Well, at the very top is a sky deck. So again, that's an offer back to the city of Melbourne.
Yep.
That's an offer for the public to come up and enjoy these incredible views that you do get up there.
Yep.
And that was really at the time a remarkable building because it tested the residential market and it was really well accepted.
Yep.
It defied all the development kind of cues in those days. It was a risk, but we still felt that it was necessary to provide something at the top of the building that the general public could enjoy.
Yep. But what about the gold part of it?
Yeah.
What does that represent?
And look, when I talk about this building, of course, or talk about any building, let me get one thing clear. It embarrasses me a little bit to say, what were you thinking? Because these buildings come out of incredible team efforts. the team in the office that worked on
Yep.
this all contributed. The building actually, and I know I'm diverting from the question a little bit, but just to get things
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Nonda is my co-founder in this business, Nonda Katsoulides, and he's a brilliant architect, but he took architecture to another level when he started developing, and our early work was able to be made in the way it was, a little bit adventurously, because he was the client. He actually got hold of the land and he initiated these projects.
Yeah.
And this was one of them. This is a piece of land that he saw. He put a development team together, and then through the office designed this building. Interestingly, this building had a permit previously of 2 towers, and those the site was then put up for sale with the permit for those 2 towers. And his view was that, and our view was that the towers were just another bunch of towers on South Bank.
Yeah.
So they're just a kind of flat sort of roof line.
Yeah.
And as I said to you earlier, the cities are made from, you know, the big cities are made from tall towers and the way that they
and when
interact.
when you're coming from an airport in any city, you know, like, I love that, and you're coming down the freeway from the airport, and you see the city in the distance and the different towers.
Yeah.
It tells you what that city is about.
Yeah.
And this one is a classic example.
It really showed how adventurous Melbourne was in design. It was very successful.
Yep.
And by putting one building on top of the other and creating what was the tallest building in Australia, tallest residential building, I think, in the Southern Hemisphere, it was a real milestone for Melbourne.
Yeah.
And an important one. It really set a trend, and people became less afraid of apartment living in high-rise situations.
Yeah. So, like, all of a sudden, instead of doing 2 buildings, you put one on top of the other.
Yeah.
That's how you got around it.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. All right, now back to...
Yes, but then once you've done that, and to get back to your question,
Yes, yeah.
Very early buildings, tall buildings, were just extruded, and they were quite remarkable because of their simplicity and their statement. But we've developed from that. We think that buildings, and you refer to them as an art form, they are sculptures in space.
Yeah.
At a huge scale. And so any of the buildings that we particularly do, we think about them in that way. We think that they are seen from different angles, and what a beautiful opportunity to see a piece of sculpture that's changing as you go around it.
And this one does. It really
does, yeah.
changes. You know, like, it looks very different from
Yeah.
different angles.
And as your eye travels up the building, isn't it great that there's something up there that makes you, as a presenter, ask me, as an architect, something particular about that building?
Yeah.
Why is that gold up there?
Yeah.
Well, does it look beautiful?
It looks spectacular. And when the sun hits it on certain days, whoa, it's spectacular. Or if there's a fog and the sun through it, and it's just, it's quite spectacular, isn't it? What
It is.
creates.
But
were you aware that might have happened, Karl?
Oh yeah.
You guys know those
It's
tricks.
about reflectivity.
Yeah,
In fact, it's about, we couldn't go at one shade more reflective without, blinding people. But the wonderful thing about buildings is the way the public then engage with them intellectually, or maybe not so intellectually. In London, we've got cheese graters, we've got
Yes.
walkie-talkies, we've got all these things. But what this became known for, because of its name Eureka, it referenced the Eureka Stockade.
So the gold being the gold?
So people that see this building start to see a symbol of Eureka Stockade, the gold.
Yep.
And they see the red stripe. and
Which is?
They see that as maybe being the trickle of blood,
The blood, yeah.
from the actual event of the Eureka Stockade. And so therefore this becomes part of city legend making. And if a building can contribute in that way, then it just adds to the richness of the city itself.
Yeah.
And the story of the city.
And then all of a sudden you get down ground level, sort of ground level, and the bees, which we're featuring over my shoulder, and I'm sure we'll be showing it on the screen as we speak. What is it about those bees, and where did it come from? Because I love that art form, you know, like the beehive and the queen bees there, and you know, like it's just something a bit special for a building, isn't it?
It's very special, but as I was saying earlier, the ground plane, the lower realm of the building, is all about the opportunity to give something back to city, and art can play a really important part of that. In this case, we designed the box as a home for a major art piece, and I think Richard Stringer, who is the artist, was a friend of Nonda's, and they hatched up the idea of these bees, and Richard made these bees single-handedly, which is an amazing feat of engineering in itself.
Yeah.
They're beautifully made, and when they're on the ground being erected, I realised how huge they were and how beautifully built they were.
Yeah.
Really great artwork.
And you were telling me, because from the ground you can tell they're big, but the queen bee is, you know, like massive, isn't it?
Massive, yeah.
So, you know, like that surprised me in a way. But you also told me another story that, you know, like there was a concept that maybe you'll get the bees on buildings all over Melbourne in different shapes. But the artist went, no, I can't do another bee. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. Actually, we added another bee onto the lower part of the glass windows much later, and our Mayor, Sally Capp, was lovely enough to
the
be there,
Lord Mayor?
the Lord Mayor, to open the proceedings. And I whispered in her ear, wouldn't it be good if we had bees all over Melbourne? Because one of the bees has actually landed on our office, which is over the road. So it's already in the public realm.
Right.
And if you had one on railway station, on the town hall, on the library, etc., on some of the major public buildings, I would just be a great curious thing. And bees are fantastic little animals.
And important to the environment. And there are so many, you're hearing nowadays that on top of a lot of buildings, there are actually beehives deliberately put there.
Yes, exactly.
Which is really exciting. But it didn't happen.
It didn't happen because, I think mostly because I don't think Richard had another bee in him.
How many are there?
There's about 12 on
bees.
that building, on Eureka, and then one over the road on where our office is, on 2 Riverside Quay.
Right, okay. Now, all of a sudden, you mentioned that was the tallest building in the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah.
But then you went, nah, not good enough. So you thought, we can't have that the biggest building. Let's build one bigger. And they're sort of just up the street from each other. What's that building?
That's Australia 108.
Yep.
And
it's over your shoulder now.
Yes, it is, yeah. It's another residential tower. And it's also got a striking gold feature that's up there that you can just see people in the street always pointing to it and talking about it. And
what's going on in that gold structure?
Well, that's all the facilities for the residents in the building. And here's another thing that these tall buildings can do. They can provide the view and amenity of height to people that don't live in height. So people in the lower reaches of the building, maybe in smaller apartments, without such an incredible view, are able to go up. We have 2 swimming pools up there.
Oh, wow.
They can swim to infinity edges looking at the city.
Whoa.
There's big dining rooms with kitchens, and so if they want to have a lot of people to their home but can't fit, they can do it up there.
Book the function area.
There's lounge areas, there's gyms, virtual golf. So it's a striking piece. It talks about community, and again it gives the building a very special and unique personality.
Yeah. But you also just don't work on tall buildings. There's other spectacular buildings, which you know the one that I'm talking about, and it's sort of that beautiful rust effect, which I love that effect. What building's that?
Are you talking about Garangula?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's was designed by our Sydney partner. It's a museum building. It houses a private collection of Indigenous art.
Wow.
And the brief was for 100 pieces of art, 100 pieces for dinner. Sorry, 100 people for dinner.
Oh, 100 people for dinner.
Yeah.
It's stunning building.
Yeah.
You know, like, and again, it's giving you sort of real depth and height, but it's going out, not up.
Yeah. Garangula is a really important art museum because it does address the respect for country that is so much on the agenda now.
Yep.
And it was done quite a few years ago, but
Yep.
Indigenous artists were involved in designing some of the cladding
Yep.
systems. The materiality comes from the earth and the country.
Yeah. And how does it feel now? You know, like you've achieved so much. Have you still got the hunger in the belly to do more?
I'm still at the office every day, and there's still challenges that.
And I know you're in the middle of a submission at present, aren't you?
Yeah.
And it's a pretty big deal one, isn't it? Which you probably don't want to talk about.
It's an arts-related project, and it's very, very important for Melbourne. And to have the privilege of being entrusted with contributing to something like that is...
Is it the NGVs?
It's it's in the arts precinct.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. But that's, you see, it's a very difficult profession to be in, because you start having done nothing. And how do you start with nothing to produce something? Because the trust that is put into you to be an architect on a project for someone, a lot of that rests on not just your ideas, but what you've done in the past.
Yep.
And so, as I'm getting into the twilight years of my career, I have the advantage of having done a lot of things. And so sometimes these wonderful opportunities do turn up.
Yeah.
And this is certainly one of them.
Yeah. But you've also, like your company has had a hand in the second tallest building in Australia, in the world. Where is that?
That's in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia.
Yeah.
And again, this is how remarkable things are. I got a fax one day.
Fax? That's gone back a bit.
It's 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And faxes were not common anymore. But this fax was asking if we were interested in being architects on a very tall building. And to cut a very long story short, I finally took the fax seriously and responded. And the next fax I got said, "Congratulations, you've been successful in first stage design for this building." And the rest is history. It's been a 12-year journey, and the building is the second tallest to the Burj Khalifa in Dubai.
Yeah.
But that's not the thing I'm proud of at all. In fact, the height embarrasses me a little bit.
Why? It's too tall?
No, not that. It's because with tall buildings, you're often put in a basket of contributing to egos. Okay, this developer wants to have the biggest thing,
okay.
and this kind of attitude. But this was a really important building on an important location. It's on the site where independence was declared in 1957 by Tunku Abdul Rahman, the then Prime Minister. And that was done in a little open-air stadium, which still exists and is very important in a heritage sense. And we were asked to put this huge building there. And so you think, well, what is that all about? How does that reflect that little stadium? And in fact, it does a lot for that stadium, because the stadium was in a neglected precinct.
Okay, yep.
And what this tall building has brought is a huge garden to the front of the stadium, 200 metres long, 60 metres wide, cascading water, just a beautiful, beautiful park, which acts now as an entry to that stadium, which is still used. It brought 100,000 square metres of retail. It brought residential living. It brought a sky deck. It brought a hotel. It brought 200,000 square metres of office space. It brought a community. It's right on Chinatown. It's prompted road improvements, tunnels. It's had a tremendous impact on the area and gives back to the area. It's brought an underground rail tube to a station right
there
at the building. So these buildings can be financial powerhouses that can really bring great programs of improvement to the area that they're located in. So that's what I'm really proud of. The improvements it's brought.
And have you still got that fax?
Oh yeah.
Have you framed it? Is it on the wall? No. Because how bizarre that you got a fax, because I was thinking it was a lot longer, and like as you said, 12 years ago, and we weren't really using faxes then, but they faxed you, and you got the job through a fax. I think that's fascinating.
It is, and I was asked to go to Malaysia to meet the board, and in the first instance, I said, "Why don't you come to Australia and meet us?" And
the whole team,
and see what we've done here. So Tengku Abdulaziz came. That's a royal title. Beautiful, beautiful man, who was the CEO of the entity created by PNB to deliver this building. He came to Australia. We got on famously. We spent a week together talking and planning about the building. And so then I was asked to go to Malaysia, which I did, but I was still a little bit hesitant. So I went by myself. I thought, I'll just save costs here. I'll just go solo, and found myself in a boardroom with a whole board in front of me, and me on the other side of the table like a little Lunig figure, being interviewed for the project. And it was very simple. They were very clear, and we had a project. In fact, they said, "Karl, in 6 weeks, you'll have done 6 versions, 6 options, and you will present them to the Prime Minister." I said, "Oh, fine." And that's what happened.
What a great story. What a great story. And what a wonderful career. And thank you for a lover of architecture who loves being in a city like Melbourne with the beautiful heritage buildings and the modern buildings that you've given us, who are truly art forms. Karl, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, David. It's a great pleasure.
My pleasure. Okay. I'm David Hunt. You've been watching The Art Hunter, and we'll be back again next week. See ya.